More on the dialogue. We're joined now by Dan McClory, Managing Director and Head of China at Boustead Securities. Dan, I want to ask you your take on this. 2 days of meetings, two of the world's largest economies here, China and Japan, China and Germany rather, opening markets and access. What is the win-win here for both?
Well, I think it's strategically important for both sides when you consider Brexit and London becoming less of a financial center. So getting RMB into Frankfurt, that's extremely important for both sides. I know Germany desires that. I know China wants to diversify and have other centers. I think opening up of markets and demonstrating good intent. We talked about the insurance sector earlier. We heard about that from our correspondent in Beijing. So I think this is far different than maybe some of the dialogue that's developing between China and other countries, perhaps the U.S. and perhaps even the EU as an entire bloc. I think this is a very interesting development in the last 2 days.
Well, to that note, what signal does this send and what message does it send when you see both seem to be on the same page when it comes to multilateralism and protecting and combating protectionism, especially with what you see currently in the EU and with the U.S.?
Right. Well, I think let's go back to the first question, which is, the areas that they really came together on, which are financial, insurance, equity exchanges, stock markets. Those are, by definition, international in network and in instruments. I think where you look at areas that are still being worked on between the two sides would be the more industrial aspects of the relationship. It's clearly on a completely different plane than the U.S. and China and how all that relationship and the back and forth is unfolding. But I think if you look at Germany, they aspire to have some of the things that China's created. They want to create national champions. They want to have European-wide R&D incentives. They still characterize China as a strategic competitor, which is meant to be a compliment. It's not meant to be a jab at all. But remember, innovation, equals efficiency, and that's really the offshoot from competition. So I think, again, both sides coming together like they have is very promising. I think they've picked areas that there's not a whole lot of disagreement on, and both sides want to have access to each other's financial markets.
So what will we begin to see, and how soon will we begin to see some results from this meeting? And how do you think companies and industry groups will be approaching this opening up?
That's always the question on these large and complex deals between, two global powers, Germany and China. And I think if we take the dialogue and the statements and the pronouncements that were made, a very promising start. Typically, you want to see some test cases. So the example of an insurance company, perhaps they acquired their minority partner back inside of China. That would show a proof source of that coming to pass. An area that we've seen a lot of is and I've talked about it in the U.S., is, Chinese exports of their initial public offerings. So a number of Chinese companies have listed in Frankfurt, which is very interesting because China has a vibrant stock market, so does Hong Kong, so does New York. But that's an example of a financial service product. So I think, Elaine, when we see the proof source of actual done deals, and deals ideally with private sector companies as well, that will really give everyone confidence that this is taking root, and we're going to see some new arrangements being made between the two sides.
And do you think that the outcomes of this meeting will have any impact at all with China's trading relationship with the EU as a whole, with Germany being such a strong and influential member?
I think so. Because remember, Germany is one of the most export-reliant economies in the EU. It just is. And they almost were going into a technical recession if they would have had 2 quarters of GDP devaluation, then that would have been called, let's say, the beginning of a recession. It didn't happen, and they're certainly not thought to be in one. So, but I think the message is where you have this acknowledged leader of the EU, they've seen fit to sit down with China to agree on certain areas. I think it bodes well for the EU. But again, remember, the EU is going to take on a whole lot of other areas, a lot of industrial areas, and a lot of larger policy areas that relate to some of the other topics you mentioned, Belt and Road, for one. So I think it's a good start, and I think Germany's prestige and leadership within the EU bodes well for an enhanced EU relationship with China.
Dan McClory, always great to hear your take. Thanks for joining us from California.
Thanks, Elaine.